What's up, everybody? It's the OG. Thanks for coming to the channel. Thanks for watching the first video here at the Executive OG. So I appreciate it. So what are we about? We are about working with and supporting and sharing ideas about people over 50 who have been laid off in today's job market. As you already know, the job market today is just different. It's brutal. And there's a lot of twists and turns that have to be taken just to deal with it. And, once you get over a certain age, like over 50, then the whole notion of ageism comes in. And, are you being evaluated the same way as a younger candidate might be seen? And, or are you perceived as being too expensive or that type of thing? So it's a little bit more of a struggle because we've got, that extra thing working against us with, the perception of age. A little bit about who I am. So I did say over 50, right? I was born during the Eisenhower administration, so hence OG. I have been an executive in large corporations, and I know what it's like to be laid off. It's probably the least fun thing that can happen besides a death in the family, because it's hard to understand it. A lot of times you don't know what caused it. You didn't get any feedback, and you're just kind of left wondering, why me? Why this happened to me? And is there something wrong with me? And I can tell you from having been laid off a couple of times, when your identity becomes so closely linked to your role, your job, and you don't have that role anymore, it's almost like a piece of you personally that's been stripped away. And I can tell you, there were times I just started to feel invisible. Like I didn't matter, it didn't matter, nothing mattered because I was so closely tied to my role, and that was part of my value as a person. So I've grown through that and learned that that's not my value as a person, right? But again, coming from the generation I was born in, it was all about supporting your family, making sure, there's a roof over your heads and everyone was being taken care of, right? Um, so it's really, really hard to have to experience that. And, you got to tell your friends, family, neighbors what happened. Um, Started my career in the military, jumped out of airplanes for a while. Yes, I did. Jumped out of perfectly good airplanes in the Army. I still got my beat up cavalry hat. I served in the, yeah, it's beat up now. So anyway, I served in the cavalry for a long time. Was in Germany when the wall came down, so I got to see all that kind of stuff. And I've worked with some large companies in the past and done some pretty fun and exciting things. And like I said, I got plenty of experience with this. I would tell you one of the first things I recommend you do. This is not me positioning myself as an expert, just someone who's been down this road before. Um, Go ahead and allow yourself to grieve. It's just let it happen. It's a shock. The first couple of days you're just stunned, completely numb, and if you jump right into it too soon, it's almost a form of PTSD where you didn't give yourself time to grieve, and that grieving process is still waiting to happen somewhere back in your subconscious or whatever. Again, I'm not a psychologist or a therapist, not even pretending to be one. I'm just telling you how I've experienced it. Take a couple, 3 days if you need. Go in a corner somewhere and cry it out. Get it out your system. And say to yourself, I'm going to do this for, a couple of days, however long you decide. And when that time period's over, I'm going to put it behind me and get back at it. You've got to go ahead and just let that grieving process happen. However you grieve is up to you. But do let that happen. Because if you don't, it just sits back there and it festers. And it will, manifest itself in other ways that maybe you didn't want it to. The other thing I would say is don't just sit around. You can only binge watch so much Netflix. Don't sit in a dark room by yourself. If you can get around other people, do that. Get outside, walk, do whatever you need to do because you just can't allow yourself to sit there and just stew in it, right? You don't have the luxury of time to do that. You may or may not even get a severance. It depends. But, that will obviously, kind of determine the urgency with which you're jumping back in the job market. But while you're applying for roles, while you're networking, and part of what we'll do in this channel is we'll talk about some things I've learned that I can pass on, and I encourage you all to share back on, you know, job search strategies and so forth. But while you're doing that, it's a great time to take the time to upskill yourself. Not so much because you want to add a bunch of credentials to your name, and there's nothing wrong with that if you want to. It may or may not determine, the next phase, but it's learning is fun and it's good, and it adds more depth and dimension to who you are as a person, as an employee, as a leader, whether you're an individual contributor, whatever. Um, Take that time to upskill, whether it's through something like Coursera or something like that, where you can take courses for free and just learn more. Of course, everyone today is talking about, AI. There's so many things you can learn through AI and how you can upskill yourself again as a person, as a human being. It's additional value you can add. I'm pretty conversant with AI. Not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but it's hard to be an expert because every day it changes, literally every day. Something you learn today might be obsolete by tomorrow because AI is just advancing so fast. But it's fun to see what the capabilities are. But I want you to know that, if you get laid off, it's usually not because of anything you did or didn't do. I've been laid off before when my team and myself, we were in the top 10% of the company, laid me off. Still don't know exactly why, other than, maybe I wasn't in the right clique, the right club. I don't know. I'm not that kind of person. I'm very personable and approachable and so forth, but I've never tried to be with the in group. And, a lot of companies, their corporations or corporations have that culture where you got to be in this certain clique the right way. And yeah, I got laid off when there were people whose performance was nowhere near as good as mine, was still stayed there, right? I was with a company once where I had nothing to do with it. I learned about it anecdotally, but they had hired a young lady who lived in Phoenix, Arizona. She had a good six-figure job. Her husband had a good six-figure job. They had one child, I believe. And she was hired to relocate to a new job that was in Boston, so the other side of the country. So she quits her good paying job. Her husband quits his good paying job. They sell their home in Phoenix, buy a home in Boston. 30 days after she started, the company laid her off. Yeah, I'm just gonna let that sink in for a second, right? Um, 30 days after she started, the company laid her off. So how could that have been a reflection on her performance? They just hired the woman, right? Can you imagine, right? You and your spouse quit good jobs to move across country, start this exciting new world. You sold your home, and the other part about it is that our company recruited her. She wasn't even looking for a new job. They pinged her through LinkedIn or wherever, reached out to her and said, "Hey, don't you want to join us?" So what's that tell you? Um, Either the company, it's a multi-billion-dollar company, doesn't plan well, or they knew about it and just didn't care. I don't know what other conclusion you can come to. So in the same layoff, I was still at this company. They didn't lay me off on this one, but there was a young lady who had just been promoted. 3 weeks after she got promoted, laid her off. So I'm saying all that to say that here I was in the top 10% of the company at one point. A woman who had just been promoted and a woman who had just been hired and relocated her entire family across country, all laid off. And it could not have been because of performance, right? Sometimes just because they say, hey, we need 1,000 people, you pick them. And the leaders of the business group or whatever go through and they say, okay. And this, one company that I'm referring to, the CEO, a lot of his net worth was based on stock price. And no, this is just me, hypothesizing. I have no idea, but every time that stock price dipped to where he lost his billionaire status, he was no longer in the billionaire club. Seemed like there was a layoff because, again, in this particular organization, whenever stock price dipped, they laid people off. Stock price came back up. Guess who's a billionaire again? Now, is that fact? Of course, I have no idea. I'm just telling you my perception that every time the stock price went down, it seemed like, oh, it's a great time to have a layoff. I don't think you ever saw a layoff in life. So just you can't internalize it so much to the point where you think, oh man, I must have sucked or something like that. No, it has nothing to do with you. Um, there's nothing fair about being laid off. There's nothing fun about being laid off. It sucks and it makes you feel devalued and it affects how you begin to take the next step. So don't sit around and stew. Like I said, cry it out at first, get it out your system, and then get back at it because you don't have the luxury of time to sit there and just let that spin and spin and spin and spin. Then it becomes, at some on some level becomes who you are. Stay active. Don't be ashamed to reach out, especially as men. It's hard, right? I guess we'll probably talk about layoff from kind of a man's perspective, only because I'm a man, but all are welcome. Okay, so if you're not a man over 50, that's okay. You're welcome. Also, we'll talk about men's issues to a certain degree. Well, we ain't talking about ED, so I don't talk about that. But I want to hear about your ED issues. Don't. Let's not chat about that because I get embarrassed real quick, and we talk about a whole bunch of stuff besides that. So yeah, let's not make it just men. Anybody over 50. How about that? Okay. So, but we're gonna have some fun too. It's a serious topic. We're gonna have some fun. I have another video coming out where I will share how um, I got laid off basically for being sick. I had just had emergency surgery and almost died, and I was still recovering from the surgery and got a call. The we're going on another direction call. So we'll talk about that in the next video. But thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to my rambling. I hope this helps. I know somebody out there needs to hear this because there were times I was laid off where I certainly could have used this message. So, oh, don't forget there should be a subscribe button somewhere. Go ahead and mash that thing because I'm going to have some more stuff coming out that hopefully will be fun and instructive and bless everybody. See you. Bye.